grab yourself a snack, grab yourself a beverage, because this is going to be a long one and is easily the largest video that I have ever made. 2024 was a bit like 2023 for me. It was a very mixed year for horror releases, shall we say, but I still managed to watch 36 of them, and at the time I am filming this, that is only 36 in 192 horror movies that I watched just this year. If you're new here, I go by Hordes, and if you're not new, welcome back. I talk about horror movies here on my channel on Mondays and Fridays, so if that sounds like something you might be interested in, maybe hit that subscribe button and join the Horde here on my channel. Or if you're feeling extra generous and there is a movie that doesn't appear on this list that came out in 2024 that you think is still worth watching, drop it in the comment section down below, because I am always looking for recommendations. Speaking of movies that don't appear on this list though, it is probably for one of the following reasons. I wasn't interested in watching it in the first place. I was interested, but it got terrible reviews, so I was then no longer interested. It is part of a series or franchise, and I hadn't seen some or all of the previous entries. I couldn't find it streaming anywhere within the UK, and in some cases that is not for lack of trying, believe me. I simply ran out of time, even though I had the best intentions of watching it, or I simply didn't know that it existed in the first place. And any of the movies on this list, if I reviewed them here on my channel, I will pop up that there are little review videos somewhere here on my channel if you want a little bit more information than just the brief overview that I'm going to give here on this list. So how about we start with the very worst 2024 release that I watched at number 36. The Seven Darks from 2024 is a horror anthology. A man receives 7 mysterious payphone phone calls from a dark entity, each leading to a different chilling tale. First phone call, not a clue what's happening. Second phone call, still don't have a clue what is happening. Third phone call, lather, rinse, repeat, all the way to the end, because I am convinced the only person that actually knows what the hell is supposed to be going on in this anthology is the writer and the director, because I sure as hell didn't have a clue what's going on in this one. It is not a horror movie, and I'm going to die on this hill. There is no threat, there's no gore, there's no violence, there's no psychological element, there's none of this. Occasionally, a woman turns up wielding a butter knife, pretending to be some sort of spirit. But that's it. It is weak storytelling. There is nothing of substance in this one. Just save yourself the, I think, hour and 14 minutes. There's a better anthology on this list. Give your time to that instead, and just avoid the Seven Darks. Light is a sci-fi space horror. After crash landing in an escape pod on a dark and misty planet, a mother is hunted by an alien creature which is drawn to the light that she must use to find her missing son. Alien-based sci-fi and I are not friends. We're never going to be friends. We are peanut butter and pickles. We just do not go together under any circumstances. And if you watched the trailer and thought, "Ooh, this kind of looks cool," I hate to break it to you, but the movie, it's one of those that's guilty of including all the best bits in its trailer, and the actual spaceships in this don't actually look like this, because at one point you see them fly overhead and they are clearly drones with little LEDs on the bottom of them. You could create this movie by simply staying at home. If you closed all of your curtains and then walked around your house using the little torch on your phone, it is the same as this movie. It is full of close-up shots that are out of focus, mediocre dialogue, and I couldn't tell you a single thing about any of the characters in this, and the characters are very limited in number in this, so it wouldn't be hard to find one of them that you could say something about. Nope, can't tell you anything about this movie. It's just, it could have been better if it had simply decided to crowdfund itself some kind of budget and hadn't been shot in an empty warehouse where they'd gone to a garden centre, bought 3 boulders and a Halloween smoke machine from Spirit Halloween and called it a day. Gods of the Deep is a cosmic sci-fi horror. A daring mission leads a deep-sea submarine team into a mysterious opening on the ocean's floor. They soon uncover a lost underwater world and awaken its ancient race of otherworldly beings. If alien sci-fi and I aren't friends, then cosmic horror and I are the most casual of acquaintances. We do not go out of our way to see each other, but occasionally we will end up in the same room, which is what happened when I watched Gods of the Deep, which is a science-based cosmic horror that does not understand how physics works underwater. I will explain this. I am a woman of science and logic, and I often go into the science behind horror movies in my reviews. And I could make this submarine by simply going to a hardware store and I would come out with change. There's a beaded curtain door in this. And at one point, somebody starts firing off a machine gun. Bear in mind, they are thousands of feet under the surface and the submarine just starts flooding. It would explode with that much external pressure. Like, I hate when science in science-based science fiction is incorrect. Like, everybody on that submarine should be dead. Half a star goes to the man in the Cthulhu suit, and half a star goes to one of the actors in this who is far superior to this movie. Arena Wars is a death game action horror comedy. In 2045, convicted criminals have the opportunity to compete on the world's #1 televised sporting event, Arena Wars, where they must survive 7 rooms and 7 of the most vicious killers in the country. If they win, they regain their freedom. According to this movie's very own marketing, this is about 7 killers in 7 rooms, which is a lie. There are actually 6 killers in this game because the 7th one never actually sets foot in the arena, so it does not count. This is a death game movie made by somebody who does not understand the basics of how a death game movie works. I am somebody who watches a lot of death game movies. I will watch the biggest of big budgets to the tiniest of micro budgets, so I have a full arsenal to compare this movie to, and it is not good. If you've ever seen the movie The Condemned, starring Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vinnie Jones, main character Luke in this is just a straight up knockoff of Stone Cold Steve Austin's character in The Condemned. Like, they just bought him off Temu. Sunrise is a vampire horror thriller. When a former cop named Fallon returns to the scene of a horrific crime, the residents of a rural town discover the dark visitor is really a vampire who feeds on blood and fear. Befriended by a kind immigrant family, the instinctive killer soon faces a choice of revenge or redemption. If you have seen the trailer for Sunrise, you have seen the entire movie, and I had to cut so much out of the trailer in the clip that you have just seen because it is about as spoilery as the trailer is for Old by M. Night Shyamalan. It had an agenda, but I don't think it knew how to commit to what message it was trying to get across. The script becomes muddy and very unclear the further into the movie it gets, and it just sort of loses its way and it exposes itself for just how underdeveloped it is, because the movie, like, you get to the end of this and it is just there for you to see that they had no idea how to actually wrap this movie up. To make it worse, the vampire lore in this, if you Google it, it is supposed to be of Native American heritage. It isn't. If you Google the name of the vampire, what it actually brings up is a Japanese yokai about a toilet demon which will kill you if you pick the wrong colour of toilet paper, which is far more interesting than anything that Sunrise actually did. Lord of Misrule is a folklore horror. A priest begins a desperate search when her daughter goes missing during the local harvest festival. As she uncovers secrets of the town's dark past, she must decide how much she is willing to sacrifice to rescue the girl from the grips of evil. Tuppence Middleton's character Rebecca. Can I tell you anything about her besides the fact that she's a priest looking for a missing daughter, which is in the trailer? No, and at no point did this movie ever make me feel like I should be invested in her as a character, because there is no tension, there is no kind of real build-up in this. Simply adding ominous music over the top of a scene does not make me feel a certain way when you've not actually built up the idea that I'm supposed to feel some kind of way. If you have ever seen anything that is folklore horror, you will spot the ending of this one coming a mile away. It is not original or creative in any kind of way. And it is very obvious what movies it has drawn inspiration from. I'm not going to name them in case somebody still decides that they want to watch this movie. But if you've seen anything that is folklore related, you know where this one's going from at least the halfway point. Last Night at Terence Lane's is a slasher horror comedy. After a bloodthirsty cult invades a bowling alley on its final night of operations, Kennedy, a high school student on an ultimate date from hell, must join forces with the lifer maintenance man, who happens to also be her estranged father. Now the dysfunctional duo must work together to survive the crazed murderers and find a way to save her date from human sacrifice. When I watched this one, I was in the mood for some kind of cheesy slasher movie, and there is good cheese and there is bad cheese. And this is bad cheese. I understand being a low budget movie, but you do not need to put all of your budget into your camera equipment. The costumes in this are the scariest part, because the cult in this look like they are trying to do Squid Games on a budget. If the budget was zero, they are wearing turquoise sweatsuits and the blank craft masks that you can get from any sort of arts and crafts store. This movie would have been a 1-star until the end credits song started rolling about grabbing your balls. Mind out the gutters now, please, because this movie is actually set in a bowling alley. That song has managed to redeem this movie. Frogman is a found footage cryptids horror. In 1999, a 12-year-old named Dallas Kyle captured footage of a mythical creature known as the Frogman, but no one believed that it was real. 20 years later, he returns to the same place with his friends to obtain irrefutable proof that it really exists. I'm not a fan of classic found footage. I like a mockumentary, but not a classic found footage. But I am a fan of cryptids, which is why I decided to give Frogman a chance. And to say that this one has every single found footage trope that you can think of all mixed in together is a bit of an understatement. The reveal of your Frogman is spoiled by a static camera glitch, and I hate that. I want to see what your monster actually looks like. This thing is a massive bullfrog at the end of the day. I want to see the massive Frogman at some point and it not be obstructed. The best thing in this entire movie reminds me of something from a different movie. There's a part where Frogman, and I have to try and keep this kind of PG for YouTube, is doing things with his really long tongue to a half-naked lady that's wandered into his cave, and it's a direct knockoff to a scene from the movie Head of the Family from Full Moon. And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Thine Ears Shall Bleed is a Wild West religious horror. In the 1860s, a minister and his family travel west in a covered wagon. When they hear a mysterious sound from the woods, they believe it to be the voice of God and worship it, until they discover that the sound is something much more sinister. I have so many issues with the plot for Thine Ears Shall Bleed, and I talked about all of them in a review that I did here on my channel, and my subscribers came through in my comment section and also added in more reasons why this movie is historically and scientifically incorrect. It's like the director just liked Ye Olde Wildy West and thought pentagrams were kind of edgy and cool and decided to make a movie about them. Fine. But there isn't a single death on camera in this movie, which feels very much like a slap to horror fans. It is. We come to see people get killed, we come for the gory moments, we come for the psychological moments, and there really is none of that in Thine Ears Shall Bleed. The scariest thing is the audio levels in this, because they just bombard you with the loudest, most abrasive sound consistently. Witch is a supernatural horror thriller. Smalltown, England, 1575. William embarks on a journey to prove the innocence of his wife Twyla, falsely accused of being a witch, who will be put to death if found guilty. It is now up to William to hunt down the real witch and save Twyla from burning at the stake. If you too, from the description, were expecting a movie about a witch trial, you would also have been completely tricked. I was expecting at some point the TARDIS to turn up and the Doctor and the companion to be like, oh, we've accidentally stumbled back into ye olde England and there's some kind of demonic forces going on here. Yeah, this movie is actually about time travel and alternate dimensions and realities and time. Like, nope, it's not about witch trials and it's not about witch burnings. Yes, there is a witch in this, but it's not entirely about. The entire middle section of this movie is 3 people wandering about in a forest. That's it. It is a slow burn movie that is far too much of a slow burn movie and was not what the marketing material said it was gonna be. Longlegs is a psychological crime horror. FBI agent Lee Harker is assigned to an unsolved serial killer case that takes an unexpected turn, revealing evidence of the occult. Harker discovers a personal connection to the killer and must stop him before he strikes again. Out of every 2024 release that I watched this year, nothing has been more divisive than Longlegs. There are those that love this movie, and I mean love this movie, and then there are those that do not understand why you love this movie so much, and I'm in that category. Love that you love this movie, love that for you. You go and continue to watch this movie, but I will never be watching this one again. I watched this one with my now ex, and it took us 3 days to finish this movie because neither of us were actually feeling it. Nick Cage is actually on screen for less time than Michael Keaton is in the original Beetlejuice. Longlegs has about 10 minutes of screen time in over a 2-hour movie. The marketing campaign hyped the actual crap out of this movie. Like, saying that this is the scariest thing since Silence of the Lambs. Sit down and take several seats. Is it X scariest Silence of the Lambs getaway? But if you live in the UK, I defy anybody to not see this once I point it out. Nick Cage as Longlegs, Catherine Tate as Nan from The Catherine Tate Show. Baghead is a supernatural horror. Following the death of her estranged father, Iris learns she has inherited a rundown centuries-old pub. Little does she know when the deed is signed, she becomes tied to an unspeakable entity that resides in the pub's basement. Baghead, a shape-shifting creature that can transform into the dead. 2,000 in cash for 2 minutes with the creature is all it takes for desperate loved ones to ease their grief, but she soon discovers that breaking the 2-minute rule can have terrifying consequences. The plot of this movie is what happens when people are solely motivated by money, see an opportunity to gain even more money and make stupid decisions. Iris, main character in this, is the sort of person who would bath a Mogwai. Like, John from Saw simply says, follow the rules and stupid things won't happen. And clearly this woman did not get that memo because she breaks every single rule in this stupidly because money, 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 money. Like, I would not trust this woman to babysit a houseplant. That is how awful that she is as a character. Yes, I liked the idea of the plot for this movie. However, in the end, it relies very heavily on gimmicks and really bad visuals, and I just don't think that Baghead ever reached its full potential. And it's one of those movies where I have to be really careful how I pronounce it, because if I said to somebody here in the UK, oh, you're a Baghead, especially living in the north of England, I'm basically saying that you're a moron. The Demon Disorder is a supernatural horror. Graham is a man haunted by his past since the death of his father and the estrangement of his 2 brothers. Jake, his middle brother, contacts Graham claiming that something is horribly wrong. Philip, their younger brother, is possessed by their deceased father, but how do you defeat a presence that knows you inside and out and refuses to stay dead? I had so many questions when I finished The Demon Disorder that were just unanswered, and I think a big part of this is because the director/writer has far more knowledge of this plot that didn't actually make it to screen. I think that this is a case where there is stuff on the cutting room floor that would have answered the questions that were left unanswered. It is already a short movie at 1 hour and 25 minutes, and I think maybe 10-15 minutes more of footage would have answered so many of these unanswered questions. I already knew that the effects were going to be decent and they were going to be a love letter to practical effects because this director and writer has actually got more experience being part of the special effects team and has got some fairly big titles under their belt. So I knew that that part was going to be fine. It's just there weren't actually that many of them used. This movie is just, it's the definition of a 2024 movie being just fine. Stream is a death game slasher horror. When Roy and Ellen realise their family is drifting apart, they decide that something needs to be done. Roy forces his work to take a back seat and they seize the opportunity to recreate a vacation from their past. A peaceful stay in a quaint hotel is just what they need. However, that is not what is in store for them. With 4 deranged murderers patrolling the seemingly mundane halls, the odds are definitely not in the family's favour. Roy must fight for his life and those of his family as their simple weekend getaway turns into a vacation to die for. Can somebody please check on my boy Jeffrey Combs and see if his back is okay, because he is carrying this movie for all it's worth. Not even the cameos from Tim Curry and Tony Todd can save this movie, because Tony Todd is only in it for 3 minutes at the very end, and if you didn't watch the credits, you would have missed the entire scene with Tim Curry because they shoehorned it into the end credits sequence of all places. This is a death game movie that only really kicks off around the hour and 10 minute mark. Up to this point, it is a family that don't like each other, 2 horny couples and 2 French guys, and occasionally Jeffrey Combs pops up to be like, is everybody doing okay? Like, it doesn't kick in till an hour and 10 minutes, and I could have spotted David Howard Thornton from a mile away. Him skipping down the corridor as player 2, like, he's just a reskinned version of Art the Clown in this if Art wore a tank top and a different mask. It's just David Howard Thornton allowed to be his, like, goofy character over the top kind of self that you just know he's going to deliver on. And the best scene in this, if you haven't seen it, is when they play tic-tac-toe. I won't spoil it, but just that scene is my highlight from the entire movie, and Jeffrey Combs carrying it on his back the entire time. Double Blind is a medical horror thriller. When an experimental drug trial goes awry, the test subjects face a terrifying side effect. If you fall asleep, you will die. Trapped inside the isolated facility, panic ensues as they try to escape and somehow stay awake. This movie reminds me of a less murderous version of The Facility from 2012, which is another drug test gone wrong. But The Facility is actually based on a real drug experiment that went wrong, which is the Elephant Man trials, which are horrendous if you've never heard of them. It was something that went wrong here in the UK. But this movie is just fine. It doesn't do anything new within the subgenre of medical trial horror and that sort of thing. It's a bit lacking on its horror, it's a bit lacking on its thriller, but it's not terrible. It's just not original. It's nothing new within the genre. It's got not really many gory moments. A lot of its horror comes from hallucinations and the idea that you can't fall asleep, so you don't know what's real and what's fake because your brain's playing tricks on you, sort of thing. It's just, it's fine. But then I saw somebody point out that its poster happens to look exactly like the poster for Swallow, and now I can't help but see that this and this are fairly identical. Stop Motion is a psychological horror thriller. Ella Blake, a stop-motion animator struggling to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother, embarks upon the creation of a film that becomes the battleground for her sanity. As Ella's mind starts to fracture, the characters in her project start to take on a life of their own. While I was watching this one, I kept thinking to myself that this reminded me of the short D is for Deloused from the ABCs of Death 2. And it turns out I was absolutely correct, and this is the same director down to the creepy kind of claymation animation. If you're new here, you probably don't know. I'm on a little bit of a personal mission to find out where the directors who were featured in the ABCs of Death across the entire franchise have ended up and what sort of projects that they have been doing and creating since those shorts. But I just don't think that stop motion is for me, because beyond the claymation parts in this movie, I wasn't really that invested in the plot. I like how messed up and how weird and how gross this movie is, But our main character is a little bit like a PSA as to why, for YouTube friendly purposes, why you shouldn't hang out with a girl named Molly because she gives you strange hallucinations. Black Cab is a paranormal horror thriller. When Anne and Patrick hail a black cab after a night out, their driver is chatty, jovial even, but they are in no mood to talk. In fact, the couple is barely on speaking terms. That is, until they realise that their driver has no intentions of taking them home. Locked in the cab with no means of escape, the driver transports the couple to a stretch of deserted and supposedly haunted road. But what is his purpose? Is he mad or just plain evil? And why has he selected Anne and Patrick as his victims? This one I could very easily switch between a 2.5 and a 3. Which is why it is going in this position. But just like with the movie Stream and my boy Jeffrey Combs, I'm gonna need somebody to check on Nick Frost and see if his back is also okay, because he is single-handedly carrying this movie. The horror thriller part of this is much stronger than the paranormal part in this, which takes such a long time to truly kick in. And if you didn't know, it's actually based on a real place here in the UK called Bluebell Hill, which is down in Kent, where there are actually ghost sightings of a ghost bride and a hitchhiker, and this story is like a mashup of the two. But I just think the paranormal part in this movie is so underbaked and left open to interpretation compared to the beginning, like, horror thriller part. Just let Nick Frost be the, like, chaotic cabbie driver with some kind of sinister motive. Like, the paranormal part just kind of ruins the entire movie, if I'm being honest. Like, either commit to it or don't do it. Out Come the Wolves is a survival horror thriller. In a cabin deep in the wilderness, a weekend of hunting turns into mayhem and a fight for survival when a pack of wolves attacks a man, his female best friend, and her fiancé. Just putting it out there, I was team wolves from the very beginning. And this movie should really be called Out Comes the Wolf, because I don't think that two wolves appear on screen together simultaneously for more than about 1 to 2 seconds. This is a survival horror thriller by the same person that made, I want to say, Blackfoot Trail. I'll insert the poster. It's a survival horror movie about a massive black bear attack. It's that movie, but instead of a bear, it's a wolf. And I hated the fiancé with every fibre of my being. What a rancid little man he is that absolutely deserves what he gets. And the animal attacks in this are 100% the best part of the movie, but I would have liked more of them. But I feel like I'm asking a bit much when there's only 3 people on the entire cast for this. But it's fine, it's decent. If you like animal attack movies, then maybe give this one a shot. Cold Meat is a mystery horror thriller. Dave Peterson is passing through the Colorado Rockies. After saving a young diner waitress from her violent ex-husband during a break from driving, he hits the road again through a dangerous blizzard. One false move behind the wheel finds him waking up inside a ravine in the eye of the storm. But the cold is the least of his worries when a beast starts prowling outside. David is going on the list of trash humans that absolutely deserve what they get in movies. And I can't say why, because big spoilers. The horror thriller part of this movie I have no problems with, and I think that that is the far stronger side of the plot in this. But the supernatural side of this, it's so devoid in the entire plot. Like, the poster has now been on screen for longer than the actual monster is on screen in this movie. I swear, the full shot of it is maybe 2 seconds maximum. All the action happens between the two characters stuck in the isolated location within the car. I have no problems with any side of the plot, but don't promise me supernatural and then don't develop on it. This is like the opposite of the movie The Ritual, where the monster's presence is sort of built up throughout the entire movie before the big reveal. In this, it's probably hinted at twice and then shows up for 2 seconds and then is like, bye, and is gone for the rest of the movie. Visually, it's got a lot going for it, and like I said, the horror thriller part is fine, but its plot at one point becomes a bit like trudging through snow in flip-flops. All You Need Is Death is a folklore horror. A young couple who is part of a secret organisation travel at night with the desire to uncover forbidden knowledge. They believe the living more than alchemy is contained in old forgotten songs. When they find an elderly mysterious woman who sings songs that have never been heard before, they open the door to an ancient evil and madness. I think that this one isn't going to be for everybody. In fact, I think that the audience for this one is quite niche, and the plot is simultaneously simple and incredibly difficult to follow, and I will try and explain this. The simple part of the plot is a man trying to find out who killed his parents, and the not so easy part to follow is the whole folklore part of this. Folklore is something that I think when it comes to horror, you need to either have some kind of prior knowledge, or your movie needs to do a really good job of telling you exactly what it is that you need to know. And while All You Need Is Death does explain things to you, it does this incredibly late into the movie. We're talking the hour and 20-minute mark. So you spend most of the movie just questioning what in the hell it is that you've just watched, because it isn't being explained to you until so late into the movie. Like, the visuals and the sound in this I really enjoyed, but the plot, I liked part of it and I also didn't like part of it. I think this is one of those movies where you need to go away and do a little bit of research into Irish songs to actually fully understand what you are watching. Jack in the Box Rises is a supernatural slasher horror. When a creepy Jack in the Box is discovered and opened on the grounds of an exclusive all-girls boarding school, 6 brave students soon enter a fight to the finish against the unleashed demon. Some of you are like, Hordes, really? The Jack in the Box franchise? And to that I say, yes, I'm a little bit invested in this series at this point, because with every single entry that comes out in this franchise, there are vast improvements to its quality, and in this one its cinematography is just leaps and bounds ahead of the second movie. It's like the director knew what he wanted to do with this series, but with every single entry is able to get nearer and nearer to that like initial thing that he wanted to do with it. The character of Jack, I can't help it. I like him. He's a really cool supernatural entity thing, and how the actor moves in his costume is undeniably creepy and not something that you would want to come across in the dark. I keep coming back to this franchise because I want to see how far we can take this concept of 6 victims sacrificed to the Jack-in-the-Box before it becomes stale. And I'm happy to say that this one continues to work for me because of its isolated location, and it does feel like Jack is a little bit more menacing in this one compared to the previous entries, which is never going to be a bad thing for me. Is it great? No. Is it vastly better to the previous entries? Yes. Am I gonna watch the next one? Absolutely. Infested is a creature feature horror. Caleb is about to turn 30 and has never been lonelier. He is fighting with his sister over their inheritance and has cut ties with his best friend. Passionate about exotic animals, he comes home one day with an unusual spider and accidentally lets it slip away. Soon, his underprivileged suburb is thrown into chaos as the deadly arachnids multiply. Ordered to be placed under quarantine, the project's inhabitants are forced to live in lockdown alongside the terrifying spiders that are becoming bigger and bigger. The first of the big spider movies from 2024 on this list, and this one to me sadly was overhyped. I watched this in the first 2 weeks of it landing on Shudder, and I just think that there is a better spider movie that came out this year that we will get to in a little bit. I am not somebody who is scared of spiders, but it also helps that I don't live somewhere like Australia that has spiders that could kill me. But what does freak me out is people who freak out at spiders. Something this big is nowhere near as something that is the size of me flailing and freaking out at the thing that is this size, which happens to be every single character in this movie, because nobody has a level head on them when they see something this big compared to something the size of a car. Caleb, our main character, I can't stand. I would personally have fed him to the spiders for most of this movie just because of his bad attitude and his ego. He's so unlikable. I'm not gonna feel sorry for somebody who doesn't want to own up to their mistakes even when people are being killed. Like, I get you're lonely, mate, but someone's died because you bought a weird spider. The spiders in this as well also get comedically big, and I mean like ridiculous. Like, where do you go when you've reached the point in your movie where spiders are now the size of a car? The answer is nowhere because we've reached the point of ridiculous. Lisa Frankenstein is a horror rom-com. After suffering an unspeakable tragedy, Lisa finds herself in a new school her senior year in 1989, struggling to fit in despite her sister Taffy trying to get her to conform to her more typical cheerleader vibes. When a freak accident reanimates a corpse from the abandoned cemetery where she's been spending time, she must keep his arrival a secret from her family and classmates, all while deciding how much she wants to help him and at what cost. You would think that I would like the Happy Pink horror movie, and I will start by saying I watched this movie on a long-haul flight when I'd only had 3 hours of sleep, and that was a rough flight. The acting in this is solid. There's some gross out humour thrown in, which feels very like 2000s, late 90s Nickelodeon. The soundtrack is full of bangers, but the plot for me feels very like it's in two halves. There's the first half up to the first death, and the second half after that first death. There is nothing quite like barbecuing your zombie boyfriend in a tanning bed to jumpstart his brand new ear. That is great. Everything after that bit, love all of that bit. There is something about Lisa and her zombie boyfriend in this that I love. They are the best parts of this entire movie, as well as College Gino in this as the evil stepmom, and I will watch College Gino in absolutely everything because, oh boy, do I love that woman. Monster Mash is a classic monster horror comedy. Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the Invisible Man must work together to stop Dr. Frankenstein and his monster from creating an even more unstoppable monster made from using pieces of themselves that he has stolen. This was actually the second movie I watched on that same long-haul flight, and I expected nothing from Monster Mash and was so pleasantly surprised. If you like classic Universal monsters, you will like this movie. It is campy in its humour. All of the characters in this feel like they're authentic to their original counterparts, but just a little bit newer with a slightly fresher coat of paint on them. My personal favourite in this happens to have not been included, so if we ever decide to expand on this, I would like Gilman Please from The Creature from the Black Lagoon. But out of everybody in it, Dracula, possibly my favourite. He's like some sort of suave daddy in this who is very like, you have stolen my child, I have come to save them with my friends, and I love him so much. The Wolfman in this is great. There's the Mummy, there's also the Invisible Man, who is the most comic relief part of this entire movie. Dr. Frankenstein is great. But there is the most wholesome little friendship that starts to form in this between Frankenstein's monster and Dracula's daughter, and I love the both of them together. Their friendship is so wholesome. But the CGI in this, I was very invested in this. There's a few pop-ups that are like, are you ready for the ending? And I was like, I was gonna watch the ending anyway, I don't need your pop-ups. But the CGI fight at the end, it is terrible, but I can't help but like it. And if you haven't seen Monster Mash, and you do like a B-movie and a classic monster movie, this is one of my recommendations on this list. Humane is a psychological horror thriller. In the wake of an environmental collapse that has forced humanity to shed 20% of its population, a family dinner erupts into chaos when a father's plan to enlist in the government's new euthanasia program goes horribly awry. I won't lie, I watched this one because this happens to be the directorial debut of Caitlin Cronenberg, aka daughter of David, sister of Brandon, the Cronenbergs, the Cronenberg dynasty if you wish. And I'm happy to say that this one did not disappoint. This is a eat the rich kind of storyline, but if the rich were going head to head with each other and each thinking that they were more entitled to live over somebody else because they happen to be rich. And you can't tell me that people wouldn't behave this way in this situation. There are people that would behave this way even without this situation. It does have a few pacing issues, I will say, but I can overlook that because that ending is great. Sting is a creature feature horror. One cold, stormy night in New York City, a mysterious object falls from the sky and smashes through the window of a rundown apartment building. It is an egg, and from this egg emerges a small little spider. The creature is discovered by Charlotte, a rebellious 12-year-old girl obsessed with comic books. After raising the unnervingly talented spider in secret, Charlotte must face the facts about her pet and fight for her family's survival when the once charming creature rapidly turns into a giant flesh-eating monster. The second of the 2024 big spider movies. Who would have thought that this would be the year that big spider movies tried to come back into mainstream horror? I just think that this movie's plot works for me more than Infested. Like, yes, Sting gets to be a very big spider, but she's not the size of a car, and there's not hundreds of her, which I think makes Sting that little bit more lethal. There is some gnarly CGI looking in this, which isn't, yeah, we'll ignore that. Like, but the practical effects in this, I have to give a shout out to. All of the webbing, the people suspended by the webs in the ventilation shafts, and every time that you see Sting close up, that is an animatronic, because I am so fortunate to be able to say that when I posted my review for this one on Letterboxd, somebody at Weta Workshop, who actually worked on this movie, reached out to tell me that yes, Sting is a giant animatronic spider, and I love that. Give me one massive gnarly spider over a horde. What do you call a group of spiders? We'll call them a horde for now. Give me that, and I am sold. Broken Bird is a surreal psychological horror. Sybil Chamberlain is a quiet, creative soul, her hobbies being taxidermy and poetry. She works at a funeral parlour as Sybil likes dead people. It's a lonely job with few perks, so she takes solace where she can, but reality and reason are slipping away from Sybil, and her dark desires take a dark and strange twist. This is a surreal art house kind of horror. Think like Flux Gourmet for the morbidly inclined, including the same turquoise colour palette. This movie, I did not expect to come across a movie this year that had a dream sequence about punching a corpse in the face in a funeral parlour. And this, like, dream style technique gets used multiple times throughout this movie with our main character Sybil, who is becoming more and more unhinged. So you no longer know what is real and what is going on in Sybil's imagination. This is not going to be for everybody, and I'm going to have to try and keep this in YouTube friendly terms again. This is a movie where a lady does questionable things to an embalmed corpse. So make of that what you will. Like I said, it's not going to be for everybody. Go into this one knowing the basic synopsis. Nothing more than that weird basic synopsis that I read out. Because the last 30 minutes of this is going to be a wild ride for you. There are two storylines in this that are going on, and I had no idea how these two storylines were going to converge together, but it was so good the way they did it. It is a weird, weird little movie that, like I said, not everybody's going to like, but those who will really like this art house surreal movie. Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 is a slasher horror. Deep within the 100-acre wood, a destructive rage grows as Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Owl and Tigger find their home and lives endangered after Christopher Robin revealed their existence. Not wanting to live in the shadows any longer, the group decides to take the fight down to Ashdown, home of Christopher Robin, leaving a bloody trail of death and mayhem in their wake. If you had told me last year that I would be sat here telling you to watch the sequel to Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, I would have laughed my ass off, yet here we are doing that exact thing. This sequel is 100 times better than the original. It's like they heard all the criticism, took it on board, and decided to actually make a serious, campy slasher movie. In the original, could I take Pooh and Piglet seriously in their rubber masks? No, but now led by Owl with Tigger on board, they are now a legitimate threat. But I don't think that people are actually going to give this movie a chance when it's a decent movie now. Too many people, I think, got burned from the original and are now like, I want nothing to do with this franchise. But in all honesty, they have really listened to that critique. They've made a decent movie, and it has actually got room to grow and get better going into the third entry because, surprise, there is actually going to be a third one. The Blue Rose is a surreal horror drama. In the 1950s, two rookie detectives set out to solve a homicide, only to discover themselves in an alternate reality made up of their own worst nightmares. First off, the director for this movie is only 18 years old, and I've seen a lot of hate towards this movie in the very limited reviews, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I think a lot of those people who have reviewed this, mostly on Letterboxd, need to sit down and actually acknowledge the fact that they at 18 years old could have not directed, wrote, and starred in simultaneously the same movie. The main thing that people like to criticise with this movie is it is very David Lynch inspired. And I am not a fan of David Lynch. I find his movies are far too surreal to me. So while I can appreciate that, yes, there is a lot of David Lynch in this, there's also a lot of other, slightly more modern references within this that I can relate to. If you're a fan of Melanie Martinez, for example, this movie takes a lot of inspiration from the K-12 album and the movie that goes along with that. It's very pastel yet bright still in its colour scheme. There's references to things like Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Its soundtrack is very like Lana Del Rey. It's a little bit like the game We Happy Few as well, in the sense of smile and pretend that absolutely everything is okay. And to top it off, there's like a sprinkle of LA Noire with its like crime neo-drama part of this. I just don't think it deserves the hate that it's getting. Yes, it is very David Lynch inspired, but it is not just David Lynch inspired, and I think that more people should actually give this a chance and realise that, yes, there's more to this one than just the David Lynch references if you're prepared to look for them. Oddity is a supernatural horror thriller. When Danny is brutally murdered, her blind occultist twin sister Darcy goes after those responsible, using inherited haunted items as her tools of revenge. This movie will have you walking around your house for a few days with all the lights on, just in case there is a woman waiting to scream in your face that you need to run away from. Twins in horror movies are always going to be creepy, but you make one of them dead and the other one blind and a psychic who happens to have a mummified woman in a box who has a hole in her head that she can insert things into, you'll be wishing that you were an only child, or in my case, grateful that you are an only child. I am so happy that I watched this movie when it came out, because there was zero hype around this movie when it first dropped until people found it and started giving it word of mouth. This movie was just quietly, it was coasting under the radar, and that has massively gone in its favour. Knowing nothing about this movie, I didn't even watch the trailer, I was so pleasantly surprised by this one. Go into this one knowing as little as possible, but I do have to knock points off, unfortunately, because I predicted the ending, which is a pet peeve of mine. Don't let me predict your ending, don't do it. Abigail is a vampire horror comedy. After a group of would-be criminals kidnap the 12-year-old ballerina daughter of a powerful underworld figure, all they have to do to collect the 50 million ransom is to watch the girl overnight. In an isolated mansion, the captors start to dwindle one by one, and they soon discover that they are locked inside with a not-so-normal little girl. I almost didn't watch Abigail because by pure coincidence, at the time this movie dropped, I had just watched another movie about vampire ballerina children. I kid you not. The movie is Livid from 2011, if anybody is interested. And Abigail, in the battle of the ballerina children vampire things, wins hands down. I find that movies that are led by child actors can be very hit or miss, but I kept seeing the poster for this one and thinking, why do you look so familiar? And then I realised that this is Alicia Weir, who happens to play Matilda in the Matilda musical, the movie. And all of a sudden I had far more faith in this movie, because this is a girl who can sing and dance and act, who you would not know is actually Irish until you heard her speak in interviews. So I suddenly had all the faith in this movie. And Abigail is not your standard vampire. She's not your slightly posh, slightly feral, you know. She's not an underworld vampire. She's not a Twilight vampire. She's a bit like an end boss. Like, think an Elden Ring boss, because this girl just keeps coming back and refuses to die. She's a Soulsborne boss. Not one I want to go against. And I love in this that when the vampires die, they just explode. They just explode into blood and chunks, which is my favourite type of gore. I love the gory, like, give me fire hydrants. That's what I want. And that is what Abigail gave me, and it feeds my soul. Tenants is a horror anthology. After waking up in an unfamiliar apartment complex, a woman desperately searches for her sister while being hunted by a shadowy figure. As she makes her way through the building, unspeakable horrors befall the tenants that she interacts with. Considering the first horror anthology I watched from this year was the worst thing that I had seen, it took me a while to pluck up the courage to finally watch a second one. And when I discovered Tenants at the end of September when it was first released, it gave me the same vibes as Silent Hill 4, The Room, which, if you know me, anything that gives me Silent Hill 1 through 4 vibes is never going to be a bad thing. And oh boy, was I glad that I gave this one a chance, because when I first reviewed this one, it had maybe 60 reviews on IMDb and 25 on Letterboxd. And this is my hidden gem pick for this year, because still nobody is talking about this movie. It is a horror anthology where every single short is completely different in its take on horror. It has got one story that goes all the way through, which is about Joni trying to find her sister. And the other shorts are to do with the tenants that she meets. So they all interweave throughout each other. But the short, The Hoarder, I was not expecting like heartfelt whimsy horror in this movie. That second short is like one of my favourite things that I've seen throughout the entire, if you, just that short. But everything about this anthology is great. It is such a surprise, and I just wish that more people would give this one a chance. Like I said, it's a hidden gem, and there's a full review here on my channel if you want to know more about every single short. Mr. Crockett is a psychological supernatural horror. In 1993, a mysterious children's show host, Mr. Crockett, magically emerges from television sets to kidnap young children, brutally slaying their parents in the process. After Mr. Crockett snatches her son, one determined mother embarks on a perilous quest to track down the demonic entertainer and rescue her son. If CBeebies was run by Freddy Krueger, who happened to have childhood trauma, you get Mr. Crockett, who spies on parents using your VHS player, and if he doesn't like what he sees, he's going to come and kill you complete with puppets in a manner befitting of his kids' TV show. Just the not-so-kid-friendly version, shall we say. Is Mr. Crockett a straight-up bad guy, though? I want to say no, but what villain doesn't have some kind of seedy side to their backstory? Because Mr. Crockett doesn't just prey on any parents. He preys on those who are verbally or physically abusive to their kids, or those who are neglecting their kids. And he just takes them off to his world and leaves the parents to deal with it. I think this is one of those movies where, raise your hand if you have childhood trauma, you will relate to this movie far more than somebody who had a happy, lovely childhood. It's definitely gonna be one of those movies that hits entirely differently depending on your upbringing. Slay is an LGBTQ+ vampire horror comedy. After a booking mistake, 4 drag queens find themselves performing for a mostly unwelcome crowd in a dive bar, but when vampires attack, the crowd looks to the queens to save the day. This movie held on to my #1 spot from April to the very last day of November, and I am so happy that this still managed to make top 3, because this is 100% my comfort zone, and it is such a fun movie. It's like if The Gays made From Dusk Till Dawn mixed with Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, and it's got drag queens in it that if you've ever watched RuPaul's Drag Race, you will know exactly who Trinity the Tuck, Heidi in Closet, Caramel, and Crystal Method are, because talk about winners and fan favourites. This is a really sort of heartfelt movie as well. If you are within the LGBTQ+ community, or if you're an ally, there are heartfelt moments in this that are going to hit home. The comedy just works so well for me. The neon colours, the campy humour, the puns. If you love a pun, you'll love this movie. Like Crystal Method squeaking her way in vinyl through a ventilation shaft. The Bianca Del Rio boat neck gown joke. There's so much in here for people who are within the LGBTQ+ community, or allies, or people that love Drag Race and drag queens and vampires and camp. And I wish more people would watch this movie. I really do. It's on Tubi, so it's free. So if you haven't seen Slay, the fact that this movie held on to my #1 spot for over 6 months should tell you something. Your Monster is a horror rom-com. Soft-spoken actress Laura is dumped by her long-term boyfriend while recovering from surgery and retreats to her childhood home to recover. With her future looking bleak, insult is added to injury when Laura discovers her ex is staging a musical that she helped to develop. But out of these gut-wrenching life changes emerges a monster with whom she finds a connection, encouraging Laura to follow her dreams, open her heart, and fall in love with her inner rage. I seriously thought that Slay was going to be my #1 movie this year, and then I saw the trailer for Your Monster and knew that I had a serious contender on my hands. If you can make me cry, the Ice Queen cometh cry, then you know you're on to a winner. When I first watched this movie, I was 6 weeks fresh out of a 2-year relationship, which ended under abrupt and messy circumstances, and in a way where one person has decided that I'm never going to get closure, which is on them rather than me. And how Laura, our main character, is feeling in this movie was like a direct mirror reflection of all of my own thoughts and feelings at the time. So I am going to say that this movie was a very sort of healing movie for me, because it was able to put in like my own thoughts and feelings in a way that I couldn't actually verbally express at the time. If you have ever been in a relationship where you are unknowingly being taken for granted at the time and are left with nothing when your relationship ends, you need to watch this movie, because it will help you come to terms with what happened to you, because this movie is about processing all of your inner thoughts and your emotions and how valid all of this is, and embracing that inner rage and using it to better yourself and move forward. Monster in this is everything. I love the character of Monster. He is where the horror part comes into this. Yes, the horror is quite light in this movie, but if you have ever been, like I said, through a breakup where you didn't realize at the time that the way things ended were not okay, you need to watch this one. The Substance is a satirical body horror. Elizabeth Sparkle, a former A-lister past her prime, is suddenly fired from her fitness show by repellent studio head Harvey. After an accident, she is presented with the opportunity to test a mysterious new drug, the Substance. All it takes is one injection and she will be reborn temporarily as the gorgeous 20-something-year-old. The only rule? Time needs to be split, exactly 1 week in one body and then 1 week in the other. No exceptions. As a millennial with body issues, thanks to growing up in the 2000s and being in my 20s in the 2010s, this movie hits very close to home. There has always been this toxic attitude within Hollywood and the beauty industry that women need to look and act a certain way, and that we have these built-in sell-by dates where you can only have a career up to a certain point. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but men are basically allowed to look and act however they like and will never age out of their career. And The Substance takes a great big shiny spotlight and shines it on this hypocrisy, because yes, it is hypocrisy. Thankfully, in the past few years, there have been people pushing against this though. And for every single person who will watch this movie and think, I would never take The Substance, there is going to be somebody else who thinks that they absolutely would, and that is just as terrifying as the body horror in this movie. I love body horror. I love the sort of stuff that makes you look at it and you're like, what the actual hell am I looking at? That's The Substance. There is so much going on in this movie that you just need to see this movie. Like, just watch it. If you think that you will like this movie, take a chance on it and watch it, because there is a reason why everybody is ranting and raving about this movie. Like, Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley in this movie just like Holy hell. So there you have it, the 36 2024 release horror movies that I watched throughout the year. If you've made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much. This was easily the longest thing that I have ever pieced together here on my channel, and I'm gonna keep the ending brief because of that. If you want to know where else you can find me, I am over on Instagram, I am on Letterboxd at HordesOfHorror. If you want to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and if you're feeling extra generous, chuck a like on the video because this has been a mammoth project to try and piece together. There will be no video on Monday, but I will be back next Friday with another enormous video because out of the 192 horror movies that I watched throughout 2024, I'm going to be telling you what my top 15 picks for the entire year were. So until next time, bye.